שלום, שלום לכולם, וסליחה שאני לא מדבר בעברית. אני יכול קצת, אבל זה לא מספיק להצעה הזו. אז English is much better for me. It's great to be here. And David asked me to give you a little bit of a talk about what's good, how you can use opportunities like Marie Curie. I had Marie Curie in my own career here, or also possibly other forms of postdocs in order to get the most out of it. Like basically how you approach, how you can take an attitude and how you can make preparations for a time after your PhD that is actually very useful and prepares you nicely for what you want to do after that. Assuming that what you want to do after that is science, right? If what you want to do after your postdoc is just get stranded somewhere on some South Sea island, I have no idea how to do that, right? Somebody else will have to tell you that. Just a little bit as a background of what I did before coming here. I did my magister, like a kind of funny German program in politics in the University of Leipzig, studied in London for a master's. I did my PhD in Amsterdam at the University of Amsterdam. Then I moved for 4 years to Ludwig-Maximilian University in Munich. And then from Munich, I applied for a Marie Curie fellowship, which got me here in summer 2014. Everybody declared me crazy because, you know what happened in December 2014, right? But as you can tell from the fact that I'm still here, I like it. So I joined the faculty of the Hebrew University 2 years ago. So I've seen a number of different academic systems, and I've seen a number of different ways of spending time doing research or spending time cursing about the fact that you're not doing research. So I think I have a little bit of an overview of what there is, what opportunities there are, what are the errors that you can make. I also made some of those. And so hopefully I can say one or two things that are useful here. So you just heard about all this Marie Curie fellowship program. And I think it's a very good starting point for talking or thinking about postdoc, because in a way the Marie Curie fellowship program is a really brilliant way of thinking about a postdoc. There are a lot of ways that you can do, just think about, okay, where would I like to be? I want to do some postdoc somewhere close to whatever, make it easy so people I already know. But that is not how Marie Curie works. Marie Curie is basically a branch that thinks about ideal combinations somehow. It thinks about getting you out of your comfort zone and throwing you somewhere into a place where you can grow. And that is like the real challenge if you think about it when you start your academic career. You have your PhD ready, you have a solid basis to build on, and you somehow need to get from this phase where you are under somebody's supervision into this stage where you take your own fate in hands and where you develop something new that is your quest, your big story that you want to do. Now that doesn't necessarily mean that Marie Curie is the kind of thing you want to write right after you just finished your PhD. There are some advantages and disadvantages, but there are some advantages to waiting a little bit before you have something on the CV that looks good. But if some people, by the time they have their PhD in hand, already have CVs that look nice. I wasn't so lucky, so I had to wait a little bit. But the way of thinking that Marie Curie requires is exactly the way of thinking that helps you in getting forward here. And what do I mean by that? Well, basically, Marie Curie is essentially a grant that you get if you can get a good answer to this question: why me, this, there? And that's basically a way of thinking about projects that you would want to do. What is it that I would want to do? And how am I more qualified, more specialized, more suitable, more intelligent, more whatever than others? Why me? But not just why me this? How does what I can do connect to a specific project? And why me this there? So finding the place where everybody will immediately understand after listening what you have done and what you want to do, will immediately understand why you need to go there. Right, that's the general idea. So if you are, for instance, I started with research on framing, and if I had not already been in Amsterdam, that would have probably been my story, because everybody who does communication research understands that for framing in Europe, Amsterdam is a good place to be. because there's a lot of people working on that stuff. So if I tell a story that says, you know, I've been specializing on a specific kind of thing about frames, and this is like I have a new perspective on this thing, I'm doing this in a specific methodology. So I have a project that I need to kick forward, which deals with like frames in complex dynamic social debates. And I want to do this at the University of Amsterdam. Nobody's going to ask me, why Amsterdam? Because that's obvious, right? And that's generally the idea. Like, if you want to think about what you want to do for your postdoc, think about things that click, things that resonate, things where it just isn't another combination that makes quite as much sense. Not just because that is a useful way of thinking about developing your own quest, but also because that's how they award points, right? This Marie Curie program is brilliant in the sense that it is really built around the idea of how can we push young researchers into a situation where they can make a real impact, like can develop something for their own careers. So it's not about having the coolest project ever. You will never win against some of the senior scholars who have like years of experience. That's not the thought of Marie Curie. It's not about just moving people around Europe like the Erasmus program. As long as you get somewhere else and speak another language, everything's fine. That's not the idea. The idea is to find and match people who can make a real impact with a project that fits them and put them into a place where they can grow. And thinking about what these places might be is a useful way of thinking, regardless of whether you then end up doing this as a Marie Curie project, right? So that means that you need to define what's the big story of my research. And of course, you keep retelling that thing, right? One can refocus this thing and then talks to another kind of person, and then you tell the story a little bit different. But one of the big challenges of this entire developing your postdoc, not just as then I happen to end up somewhere kind of story, but more as a coherent story, is to think bigger, think into the future, and think what's the quest I am on. What if I think of myself without the constraints of what I can realistically do within the next 5 years, what is it that I would like to understand? What's the big story here? And then to think about how is the stuff that defines my way of working, my expertise, my specialization, my ideas, my theory, my methods, all that stuff, how is this something that enables me to make a difference with this thing? What's this link here? Is it just, am I just doing the same methods as everybody else, but I have a different theoretical point of view? What's the added value? How does what I do change my big quest? And then bring in the third place, that's Hogwarts here, I guess. It's a little bit magic. So this is basically what is a place in which this project with my expertise fits perfectly and everybody understands. What do I mean by fits perfectly? I mostly mean it basically I can contribute something and I can learn something, right? You want to think of a place where you want to go for a postdoc, which is both something where you can tell the story why they need you. I can do something, and that really is valuable for what they are already doing. But they are also doing something that you really need. This is an idea of exchange, right? This is this thought about the growing. You need to think about who is there, what people could you be collaborating with, how will this help you on your quest, right? And then only, and that's normally the question that most people start thinking from, what are the next steps? That's the last of the questions. Right? In a way, if you want to develop your postdoc in a strategic way, think about the big quest, about your contribution to your own big quest, and the people you want to work with first, and then start organizing the details. Yeah? Think big, not just because this is the moment when you define your story, or start defining your story of what you want to do, but also because that's how you get in. Yeah? People don't want to know that you are somebody who can come and then look at this policy discourse for the next 2 years and then have 2 papers published on that. That's not the story of a postdoc. They want to know that you are the one who is going to really push our understanding of something forward, and the first 2 steps in that may be this policy analysis. But that's not the thing that sells your project. So Marie Curie is different from other kind of grant programs in the sense that it gives you award points for exactly that. The better you can answer the question, why me, this, there, the more points you get. Whereas other grant programs really think more about why is this the most important thing to do, what is the innovation about the method. That's not really the question about Marie Curie. For Marie Curie, you need to tell a story about yourself, your own impact, your own quest, and how going into a specific place can bring this forward. So, should you try? Yes, it's great. It's good money. It's fun. It's 2 years if you do the global fellowship with this reintegration grant, 3 years without teaching. And you have no idea, if you haven't been teaching, how much of a relief that can be. So it's a wonderful thing to do. It's a really nice grant. But you have to keep in mind, you're not the only one who is trying this thing. There's a lot of people trying this thing. So that means that the difficulty is a little bit that it is very obviously an attractive option to apply, right? So especially in the social sciences, humanities, basically in these many people faculties, right? There are a lot of people applying, and that means that if you want to stand a realistic chance, you really need to have a better answer than all the others. And that means that basically you want to think about this a little bit. I know quite a lot of people who tried with the Marie Curie application that then just scraped the number of points that you need to get and then didn't get funded because they go down from the top until the money is gone, right? So if you just make enough points to be formally eligible, that doesn't mean that you get funded. This is not something you want to write in a month. This is something you want to think about for a while. You want to think about this narrative, about the people. You want to cast out your net and start talking to the people in the place where you want to go. Maybe you want to visit there, have a talk so people already know who you are. You want to prepare this a little bit because you are competing with a lot of people who had a similar idea, who are also smart, who also have a good story to tell. And in order to get this thing, your story needs to be more convincing. In a way, Marie Curie helps you with this, though, and that's another reason why it's a good program to keep in mind, because the European Union has this funny tendency to over-organize grant proposals, right? If you, like for a lot of things like the Israeli Science Foundation, and there's a lot of science foundations and generally of private foundations that basically tell you something like, okay, send us a research proposal. And then you can do in this research proposal a lot of things, and it's not really clear what you need to say, what you need to answer. In Marie Curie, it's pretty clear what you need to answer. If you register for this program on the European Union's website, there is this kind of checklist. There's the structure of how the entire proposal needs to look. And this is a useful checklist, because basically you can go through this from point to point to point to point and always think, do I have a good answer for that? Can I say something? Yeah? Is there something where I can basically in like 2 minutes convince whoever is glancing at this, and I mean the reviewers are obviously reading a lot of proposals, so they don't read this in depth. I can convince this reviewer in 2 minutes, okay, that makes sense. Here's somebody who has a story to tell, right? So this is heavily pre-structured, which means that this is relatively easy to figure out whether you are there, whether you're ready to write this thing. And if you go through this entire thing, through this checklist, and there are like these 5 or 6 places where you think like, I'll have to bullshit something here. Wait. Because you can't afford to lose points. Yeah, this is like highly competitive. It is highly structured, but it is highly competitive, and the structure is a help for you. But it also means that there is not one category in which you can afford to really lose points. So in the hierarchy of different kind of things that you can do, I'd say like Marie Curie is kind of the cool thing, right? Is because it gives you a lot of independence. You get your own money, and it's good money. You have no teaching, right? You have time. And it's prestigious. So starting with a Marie Curie, applying for a staff position with a Marie Curie on your resume looks good, right? That helps. I'm not sure whether I would have gotten the position here without the Marie Curie, so this was an important stepping stone for me. But this is by far not the only thing that exists that you can do as postdocs, right? There are a number of other possibilities. The most common thing, I guess, is what I called here other people's projects, right? Somebody else wrote a grant and they need a postdoc. And that's also nice because it gives you money. and you have a collaboration you don't have to organize, but somebody else organized it for you. So those things are brilliant in the sense, if you have somebody who publishes a position within a project that just happens to perfectly fit what you want to do, lovely, that never happens, right? If you have something where you know the principal investigator and you know that you can kind of develop your story within that other project, that is normally the good solution here. Right? Like if it's considerably easier to get this thing than this thing. Yeah? And if you have a principal investigator who gives you the freedom to develop your own things to some extent, and within whose project you can do a thing that really interests you, and it's not just a waste of time, or like basically you doing their project and in your free time you're doing your own project, then this is a really good opportunity. The main catch is limited visibility because you're always standing behind the principal investigator, right? So this is like, if you want to shine and tell your story to the world, which is basically what you want to do after your PhD, right? There is a little bit of a catch here. But this is still, both of those are way better than these two other options here. And this is kind of the continental European version, if you want. Like continental Europe doesn't really have this postdoc system, right? That, like in the United States, you have these postdocs that are advertised. The department's looking for somebody, for a researcher for a year, for 2 years, with absolutely no intention to give you any kind of security, with absolutely every intention to burden all the admin and all the teaching work on your desk. But otherwise, you have a job. The continental European version is a little bit more unpredictable in that sense, because it depends extremely on whom you're working with. But if for instance, going to France, Germany, Austria, Poland, Italy, if that's an option for you, the system works a little bit differently. There's basically, you don't really apply for with a project or a specific kind of advertised position. There are positions, but they're not normally advertised. But what you normally do is you get in contact with people you already know you would like to work with. Scandinavia to some extent also works like that. And then those people have occasionally positions that start freeing up, and then you know a little bit in advance. They can tell you that in a year or so, or half a year, there will be something, and then you can kind of make some arrangements on how this works. Now this is a kind of a nice option if you have these kind of connections, or if there are specific people you want to work with, but make sure that you really know those people, because in this, the main catch with this version of spending your postdoc is that whether you are going to be happy or suffer depends 100% on the person you're working with. They have complete control over you. That's the thing in this continental European system. There is a king at the top of the pyramid, and the king is occasionally getting people into their staff or out of their staff. And if the king is a nice king, that's great, because they leave you in peace, they allow you to publish, they allow you to do your things. And if the king is a not so nice king, you end up with a shitload of work on your desk, no visibility, and day-to-day fights. And it's essentially my story in Munich, right? This is basically why I left Munich, that I was in this case a queen, was in a court of one of those monarchs, and I felt that I had kind of more freedom as a PhD student in Amsterdam than I had as a postdoc in Munich. The main advantage of that system is that the pressure for publication is lower. The main catch is it doesn't force you to publish, which is exactly the same thing, right? Because especially if you want to get back to Israel or to some kind of Americanized system, you need to publish. And one of the other catches of this continental European system is that it is tempting to just do these little projects that end up in book chapters, or do like this long thing that never actually gets ready. And that's not a good strategy for getting back into an Americanized system. But this is still better than what I called here staff. This is basically the kind of people that university hires for stuff, right? They need a lecturer for something. And that basically means you teach, and then you sleep. And then you curse yourself for not having done any research, you get up and you teach. So beware of those. That is an absolute backup option. There are those things occasionally advertised, but if it already looks on the advertisement like this is essentially a teaching position, be careful. You can't really afford to waste your entire time teaching if you want to stay in academia in this thing. This is something for like filling a gap of half a year when you know you have this thing coming, or your Marie Curie is about to start, or you have some project that starts in fall and you need to bridge a half a year or something, then you can do this. But this is not an option for your career. All right. One thing that's kind of important that seems to be a little bit overlooked in, like, I guess you all got this indoctrination that, you know, you need to publish or perish, publish or perish, publish in high-ranking journals, publish a lot in high-ranking journals or perish, right? That's not entirely untrue, but performance can mean a lot of things. So, for instance, if you look at what I've been doing in my time in Munich, I haven't been publishing terribly much. But what I've been doing in Munich is I've been writing an FP7 collaborative grant project. Right? I got 2.5 million euros for the university, so that's kind of nice. That didn't have my name on it because it's a German system, right? There's a queen on top that takes the credit. But still, the fact that I had this kind of project, I could organize a project, this is a performance. This is something that you can shine with. And universities are normally happy to take people who can show they can get grants. Yeah, so don't worry too much if the profile of the postdoc that you're looking toward does not only require you to publish and do this research. There are a lot of things that are valuable. The important thing is that you can document whatever you're doing. So if you're in a system where you have a lot of other tasks, but these tasks are valuable for an academic career, and you can show that you actually do this, you can show your brilliance in this thing, then this is fine. You can work with that. The really dangerous thing is all those places where, you know, you do the methodological kind of support for your principal investigator, and then the principal investigator has 7 authors and you're the 8th author. That doesn't help you, right? Or like this thing, like the thing that I had in Munich, that you end up sitting on 7 committees, but you're never actually formally part of that committee, because formally it's always your boss, but the boss doesn't have time because the boss is busy doing whatever. So I'm actually doing this, I'm actually spending the time, but I can't actually document it. That stuff is dangerous. Yeah, that's the thing you want to avoid. Okay, how do we do this? So I'd say it's more progress or perish. It's not so much publish or perish. Publish is important, but there are a lot of ways of progressing. The main danger, I think, in a sense, is to get distracted. Right? I mean, like the nice thing about a PhD is you have this big thing at the end of the road, which always keeps you focused, and you know, okay, I need to get this bloody thing done. And that keeps you focused, and the postdoc is the time when you have an expertise and all those people come to you and say like, "Huh, wouldn't it be nice to do this?" And yeah, I need somebody who can do my stats from this thing, and wouldn't you be interested in doing this little bit of a discourse analysis on this thing that you're doing or whatever? And it is super easy to get distracted in these thousands of tiny projects, half of which never get published, most of which, even if they get published, don't get published in a place where this really helps you. And the really important thing is they are kind of these sidetracks. They're not on the main road. They're not on the way to your quest. So I think that's the most common difficulty that I have seen among friends and colleagues of mine, that basically in this phase after your PhD, you just start too many small projects and you lose the steam, you lose the energy for your projects. And that's really important, to keep to your projects, which means, you know, like every now and then some of those little things are useful because you can acquire a skill, you can acquire a network collaboration or whatever, but be careful with them. If they become too many, they are a problem. You need to stay on your path, you need to focus on where you need to go, and you need to not get too far from your own, like basically build your expertise. Don't jump to something completely different and start doing something completely strange. So getting from there a little bit to from the strategic part a little bit, okay, what does it do to you, right? Well, how does it change your life, your world, your research, your perspective if you go abroad and do a postdoc? Now, the first thing is, I'd say personally, it is a value in itself. Just going abroad, just seeing the world from another place changes your perspective like nothing else, and not only in the sense that a different culture is different, but every academic culture is different. And you look at your own work, you look at your own colleagues, you look at your own university differently if you have seen a few different universities, because you start getting perspective and you start thinking, you know, okay, you start seeing things that you could be doing better. You can actually perceive what we are doing really nicely, right? I'm having this conversation a lot here with people who think like, oh yeah, but why would anybody come here? There are quite a number of things where the Hebrew University is pretty good. Right? And there are a number of places where I wouldn't swap my current job for other jobs that I have seen, including Amsterdam, which has a pretty good reputation. There are other things that Amsterdam is good for, right? And this is extremely useful both for your further career planning, for your way of doing research, because people in other places do research indifferently. This will irritate you as hell in the first year, but this is a useful irritation. Because what you do is you take your project, get it into a new environment, and in that new environment, that project will be looked at differently. People will ask different questions. People will challenge your agenda for different reasons from what you are used to, and that's extremely useful. So just seeing the world from somewhere else is valuable. What is important, though, is that every of those systems has a number of things that can get into your way. Right? Like just for an example, something I understood on relatively late is that one of the danger of these big machines, like like there are, I don't know which these are in your respective fields, but for instance in communication in Europe, Amsterdam is a big machine. That is a big label. Everybody understands what Amsterdam stands for. University of Pennsylvania is a big machine. Texas is a big machine. They have a power because they are well resourced. They have a lot of great people there, but they have a tendency to capture you. And then you start being labeled as the person who is like that. And that may or may not be in your interest. So this is a classic shallow, right? Or you have this continental European thing that university is very personalized. Like the kings all hate or love one another. They are in varying coalitions and they are at war with one another. And if you're in the wrong kind of kingdom, that means that you bar cooperations that might have been valuable for you. So these are things that are useful to scout a little bit beforehand. So before you jump, don't blindly apply for things. Don't blindly go things. Talk to people who have been there. Talk to more than one person, because especially in continental Europe, the stories you get from different people in the same department are very different. And depending on whose opinion you get a different feel. So it's useful to know that there are different kind of catches. I would generally recommend visiting every department before you even consider applying to it. Right? Also, it increases your chances of doing this. That means that you need to be a bit strategic about this. So I know a bunch of people who just write, have this default application and they send this to everything that doesn't run away at the count of 3. Every now and then, just by accident, that works. But you're kind of being driftwood here. You're taking whatever happens to come your way. That sustains you economically. You can live off this for a while, but it doesn't get you forward, really. It just drifts you around the world, and at some point you drift home, and then you kind of wonder what you've been doing. So be strategic about this. Think about this. Don't apply to 20 places. Apply maybe to 2 or 3, but know why these 2 or 3. Know who they're, know what they are doing. Like if you go to a department and you try and apply and there's a project by somebody else, you don't only want to know that project, you want to know who else is at that department. You don't want to know whether there are some people other than this project that you can work with. You want to know whether there are other people in that project that are actually nice. Yeah, which is actually extremely important to think about. One of the things you do when you go abroad is that you make yourself very lonely in the first place. And that means it really helps to have a number of people there who you already know are nice. Just having good people to work with, like, brilliant, intelligent, capable, that doesn't do the trick. You still suffer. The idea is to have some people there that may or may not be the same ones that you are actually working with, but people who you like, people who you click with and who you've been sitting with on a conference over a beer and had this really magical conversation, right? Doesn't necessarily mean that you have to come back married from there, or maybe you are already, that's a different problem. But the general idea is you want to be networking, and not just networking in the sense of having that statisticians are always very important to have around, or having these people who have this complementary expertise for you, but you also want to have people around you who you can turn to if you're not happy, and that will happen. Nobody goes to another country and immediately swims. I've done this now 5-6 times, and I can tell you it's every time the same thing. It's like every time in the beginning it's irritating, you don't get things don't work. You need to get things organized, trivial things. For some things the universities help you, for some things they don't. You need to have people around you who you can relate to and who will help you. If you're the singleton, the only one there, and you just come there as a satellite with the intention of spending a year or 2 years and then going back and not really landing, you will suffer, and it will cost a lot of time, because that means that you will have to solve and deal with all these issues yourself. And that's not a good idea. So consider that there are also people where you feel like people you relate to in the places you apply to. That's important. Yeah, like it really makes a difference. That means that you need to also means that you need to make use of what those people can tell you, right? You've been now focusing, like in the PhD, you focus for like a long time on one set of big things. And as you know, in the social sciences, everything is connected to everything. So everybody can tell you something that might be relevant to your story. And if you have this network, if you relate to the people, if you're not just this kind of working machine that jumps into a different system, turns for 25 rounds and then flies back, but if you're actually trying to land there, if you're trying to become part of a network and make friends and collaborate, this can really enrich your work. Because if you don't do that, that's the perspective, right? Like an abandoned phone booth from which you call home and complain about how it's so rainy, and like for some reason, like you will find out that holidays suck. Holidays are the worst days in the year, right? Because if you're abroad on holidays, everybody else is at home with their families, and you're at home. Everybody's happy and you're not. And the only way to change that is to network and to have friends there, right? So if you want to not only survive, but you want to thrive, you want to develop yourself, not just as a researcher, but as a person, you need to have those people around you. So last thing to say is basically, there are many ways to the top, right? It's not that basically if you don't succeed getting a Marie Curie, if you don't get this project in the first attempt, if you end up in a position that isn't what you thought you would really have want to have, that doesn't mean you're doomed. There are a lot of ways to the top. There are a lot of ways in which you can arrange the things that you're doing, make them valuable for yourself, make them visible for your career, make them into assets. But you need to keep your eyes on where you want to go. So the quest that I was talking about in the beginning, the thing that Marie Curie forces you to formulate, this big thing at the end of the career, doesn't have to be literally at the end of career, but don't think 5 years forward, think 10 years forward, maybe 20 years forward. The big quest that you're on. That is the thing you want to keep in view, because that's the thing that will enable you to tell the story about whatever it is that you have been doing, how that helped you on that way. And that is also the way how even the things that really didn't help you on the way of what you were doing, and I have a few of those, you can still how realizing that was a useful experience, right? So I can talk about Munich in different ways. I can talk about the time as a time in which I was doing a lot of work that absolutely has nothing to do with my actual research. But I also can talk about it in terms of saying, like, one of the things I really learned in Munich is how to organize my own work such that I keep people who try to interfere with my work out of my office, right? That's a useful skill. The skill to say no. If somebody come in and says like, Herr Baden, can you do something for me? Yeah? And obviously you can't say no if this is your boss asking, right? So yeah, there are other ways of doing this. Saying like, yeah, of course, no problem. I just have to finish this thing, and then this other thing is also going to be. So like maybe next week, I should have it next week, end of next week. And that's normally the way when the moment when they turn around and ask somebody else. Yeah? These kind of things, small skills, but they're useful. Yeah? Just organizing yourself, organizing your workflow, developing strategies to keep yourself on track, developing strategies to publish, developing strategies to share your knowledge without reinventing the wheel all the time. All these things are things that get you forward as long as you can document that you do this. As long as you have a way of showing in the application process for the real position that at some point you want to have, that you have that experience. Every experience that gets you forward is valuable. But keep your eyes locked on the goal. And the only thing that really helps you here is good preparation. Don't cut this short. The main killer, the main thing that causes disappointment, the main thing that I have seen in so many of my friends and colleagues that then apply for a project, they apply for a position, they apply for Marie Curie or whatever, is that they then think like, oh yeah, well, you know, the deadline is end of November, it's now the beginning of November, I can do that. No, you can't. And the same thing goes for almost everything. For a proper position for staff, for a proper project of your own, for almost anything that you want to do. It's not just that you need a little bit of time to actually get your materials in a shape and tell your story and whatever, but just to find out what you really want to do. Just to find out whether this is really the place where you want to be. Just to determine what are the synergies, what are the things I can learn from going to that place, what are the things that I can bring to that place. That takes time. And you need to take that time. You need to take this thing seriously, because otherwise, even if you succeed getting your application through, it won't work for you. It won't make you happy. Because your happiness, your productivity, your ability to perform, to grow, to get yourself ready and get onto this fascinating journey depends on being surrounded by people who are with you and not against you, people who help you in this entire thing, and finding those people, finding ways of relating to that, defining your way in this entire big adventure and kind of relating, showing like, where can we work together, where do I do my stuff, how does my stuff relate to your stuff, what is the common quest here. That takes time. And you want to think about that a little bit. So if there's one thing I can really, I'd really like to get across is like, don't do these standard 20 applications to 50 places without thinking what that is. Be select, be strategic, be prepared, and know the people. That is absolutely essential in my experience. All the times when I have been going somewhere and I was happy, that was the times when I knew where I was going. And all the times when I was not, and the times where I felt like I'm spending 80% of my time just kind of dealing with this shit, were the times where I did not. So that's really important. Don't take this easy. Thank you. And if you have questions, I try to answer. Yes.
I will have to be short. There are between the 12th of April and the 12th of September, there are several months. Is the expectation of Marie Curie for individual fellowship? How advanced should be the postdoctoral project action? Because the description is, you summarize what arrived at so far. But what do they expect of the project description? Is it so that you need, as a matter of fact, to manifest more convincing results that what would be accepted at international conference, Second World Congress, let me say, in my case, comparative economics or anything? What is the expectation of the project description after that preparation?
Yeah, halfway a little bit. Like, I think the most common Marie Curie error I have seen is that somebody has a brilliant idea and thinks that's enough. Brilliant idea isn't enough, right? I mean, like, an idea is like, if you don't have a brilliant idea, don't do it. Right? You need this thing where you can say, okay, this is my contribution, this is the thing that I can do. But just having this idea doesn't do the trick. You need to be able to actually develop a project out of this. You need to show how this is not just an idea, but it is something you can actually do, something you can actually have thought through. That doesn't necessarily, you don't have to have all the solutions, right? But you need to have a detailed plan. You need to have a plan that is capable of communicating how are the kind of results that I will be getting from this thing different from what we already have. How is this, does this connect to other kind of lines of research? You don't need to have the answers, but you need to have a pretty good sense of what kind of answers, what kind of steps, what kind of strategies you need, because that's part of the grant application, right? As I've seen a lot of applications that get like very high scores in this scientific relevance, idea, and then in this entire, the second part, project management, organization, the steps, the workflow, they lose half the points, and that kills the thing, because as I said, you can't really afford to lose any points. So don't take this too lightly. The idea is the key. But you need to sleep on that idea for a few weeks before you can write that up, right? Really think about it, like ideally if you have a little bit of experience, that's why I normally have this feeling that Marie Curie is normally not the first project application you would want to write. It really helps if you have either at least worked in a project somewhere, or you've done something like written another project application, so you have a little bit of experience in how you can convey the steps, the key methods, how the methods interlink, all these things for your proposal, because the Marie Curie reviewers look at that. And you need to not only convince them that this is cool and worth doing and you're the person to do it, you also need to convince them that you're ready to do it. Right? That basically if you get the money tomorrow, you would know where to start, and you would not have to figure out on the way what will happen next, but you can have a plan that leads you to the end.
Well, so we are ready to say again thank you to Christian.
Mm-hmm.